Hi, and welcome to another one of my Taking Control interviews. So today I am speaking to the lovely Diane Danzebrink, who is the founder of Menopause Support and the campaign Make Menopause Matter. So you do work, hi, just to start with, hi. Thank you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So you do menopause consultations and training to organisations, and then your support campaign, which I'll ask you about properly, and you can explain it better than I will, is looking to make menopause awareness and support more freely available in workplaces, in schools, doctors having a better understanding. So do you want to talk through kind of how you got into work in this field and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for inviting me, Sarah. So first, really, like so many people who become passionate about a particular subject, it was my own personal experience
Yeah.
that led me to doing this work. So we're going back quite a long time now, back to 2012. I had to have a total hysterectomy. It was thought at the time that I had ovarian cancer. And so it had to be done quite quickly. But unfortunately, what I didn't get prior to my surgery was any sort of information about being plunged into surgical menopause. So for me, menopause at the time meant hot flushes and no more periods. That was really all I knew. So I had this surgery. Obviously, it's a pretty scary time. I had this surgery. The surgery was very complicated. But when the consultant came round to see me afterwards, she said, "Oh my goodness, kind of that was a bit of a pickle." It was a very long surgery because what we discovered was you had severe endometriosis, you had a condition called adenomyosis, you had a large fibroid, and you did have complex cysts on both of your ovaries, but I'm pretty sure that I've removed them just in time. So that in itself, that was reassuring. I then just had to wait for histology reports. And I thought, okay, well, I've been really lucky because she's taken, she's done the surgery at the right time. So I just want to go home and get well again now. So I didn't know. Of course I'd heard of HRT, but the only thing I'd ever heard of HRT was that it was scary stuff. Because the only thing that I'd ever read was about HRT and breast cancer, the kind of news headlines. So I thought, okay, go home, get well. And that's essentially what I tried to do. And cutting a very long and complex story short, I had a good few weeks to start with. And then it all started to go really horribly wrong very quickly. And it was all really around my mental health. I started to become really, really anxious. My sleep fell apart. I didn't want to leave the house. I had to stop work again. I know my husband and my mum were really worried about me. And again, cutting that long story short, it got to the point where my mental health had deteriorated to such an extent that one day I came very close to taking my own life. Fortunately for me, I have an amazing husband who took control. Not that I knew anything about it, but he made an appointment for me with our GP practice. One of the doctors stayed behind at the end of the day to see me. I went in to see her, and I was incredibly fortunate to see somebody who understood what was going on. I explained to her, and she said, "Okay, so I know what's going on, and I know how I can help you." So huge relief.
Yeah, it must have been.
She then took the time to explain to me about the drastic loss of hormone, particularly estrogen, explained to me that I didn't have to have tablets, that I could have patches, and that it was really important that I should have them and that it would help me. She didn't insist, but she strongly suggested that I started them kind of there and then, which I did. And within a few weeks, I definitely felt the benefit. Now, I want to be really careful because I don't want people to think it's magic, because it's really not.
Yeah.
It takes time, but I didn't feel as desperate as I had been feeling. So I knew that it was helping a little bit.
And just
And
such
as I,
a,
sorry,
oh, sorry,
lovely.
I was going to say just such a relief to find somebody who understood and could take that time, to, which I guess would have been a big part of it as well. Just somebody
Taking the
understanding that
time.
I can help you and I will listen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge. And so as that kind of huge relief that I'd had, it made me start to wonder if it was just me who'd been really unfortunate in not having the right information and support. And I did what we all do, and I turned to the internet and I started looking, and I started coming across forums where people were talking about how they were feeling like they were going mad, they didn't know who they were anymore, etc., etc. And I started to think to myself, how can this possibly be? Like, we're half the population.
Yeah.
Every female is going to experience menopause at some point in her life. How can we still have a situation where so many are so unprepared and unsupported? And this research went on for a while as I was, kind of starting to feel better. And on one particular occasion, I kind of knew that I was feeling better because I turned to my husband and said, how the hell can this be right? If I ever feel like me again, I'm going to make damn sure I do something to change this.
Yeah.
And consequently, that's where Menopause Support and the Make Menopause Matter campaign came from, was just not being willing to allow this total injustice to continue.
Yeah. And it's such a good thing that you did that, because it's helping so many women, but it's true. You just don't realize. I think a lot of it, like you say, comes from personal experience. I do a lot of work in the fertility field after our own struggles. So
Yeah.
you just sort of realize you need to do something about this. And so many people are unaware. And even once I started doing so much more research into the menopause, I was shocked. I'm 42 this year, so I know that I'm going to be coming up towards it. And I'm much more prepared now for hearing about it. But the lack of understanding, not just of women about what you'll go through, but those that are in a position to support you, like doctors, workplaces, things like that.
Yeah.
There's such a lot of work that needs to be done. And I mean, you've just made such big changes to that, so that people will get that support, because like you said, you had got to such a low point. If that doctor hadn't have understood the menopause, they'd have very easily just said you've got depression and put you on antidepressants, which is what
Yes.
happened to a lot of people, isn't it?
Yes,
And that doesn't
absolutely. I
solve
was
the
so
problem.
fortunate, Sarah.
Yeah.
I really was. I was so fortunate to see that particular doctor. Yeah, it was, yeah, they,
It shouldn't come down to luck, should it? It should
oh my goodness.
it
It
should
absolutely
be.
it absolutely shouldn't, lovely. And of course, the other thing is, when we think about it, when we think about the wider perspective, you just mentioned education for doctors, for workplaces, etc. If we think about the wider perspective, so yes, of course, we want every individual to have the care and support that they need, free at the point of need when they need it.
Yeah.
However, we also want all our medical health professionals to be able to recognize and support menopause, not just because they're going to be helping their patients, but also it will cut down waiting times for secondary care appointments. It will reduce secondary care appointments where people are sent off for palpitations to cardiology, achy joints and muscles, to see specialists, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But we also know that many women will go to see their doctor several times to try to get some kind of help. So it means that we would actually be cutting down on those appointments, which would free up more GP time.
Yeah.
So I think it's also fair to say that we have historically done a disservice, particularly to our GPs, and to medical health professionals in general by not giving them this education.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we also have to bear that in mind. And when it comes to the workplace, of course, if you as an employer have invested in a member of your team who is now a valuable member of your team, the last thing you want to do is lose them.
Yeah.
But unless we have that awareness and that support system within the workplace, unfortunately, we know that that historically has happened. People have left,
Mm.
and we know that it continues to happen. So I think it's really important that we look at this as better menopause education, information, and support actually benefits society. It benefits everybody.
Definitely, like you say, so from so many different angles, you know, from commercial angle for organizations, monetary angle with doctors, as you say, I think it's something like 6 times people will visit the doctors before they get a diagnosis. So that's 5 appointments that could be saved. There's the money saving on things like giving out antidepressants when they're not needed, if you can get them straight into HRT, if they end up on that anyway. There's so many different things. And I know a lot of the work you do is kind of around this awareness raising, and one of the places is in workplaces, isn't it? So what is it that you do, and what can workplaces do to start to think about how they can better support their employees?
Well, essentially what we do is we provide awareness training and training for line managers. We also provide consultancy. So that's done on an individual basis because every workplace is different. So whilst there is a template for, you know, kind of some of the things that we provide, we always like to speak to each employer individually to find out, because it depends. Is it a small business? Is it a multinational business? What are they looking to achieve? But I think the thing that is most important to me is what is the culture of the organization?
Yeah.
Because you can have all the policy guidance and awareness in the world, but if you don't have a supportive culture within the organization, and I don't just mean for menopause, I mean generally.
Yeah.
And I think also workplaces now are getting better at looking at, you know, the whole person. They're getting better at recognizing that work and personal life are not separate entities.
Yeah.
And we also have to think about workplace stresses, because we know that stress for everybody is a hormone disruptor.
Yeah.
All males, all females, it is a hormone disruptor. So we have to think about how can we work better together? That's really what we need to be thinking about here. So a lot of what I do is, yes, very much based around raising menopause awareness, but it's also thinking very much about the mental health and well-being that goes alongside that. So, you know, my background is in therapy. And whilst I'm not practicing as a therapist, when I'm doing these things, you know, sort of it definitely informs the way that I have these conversations.
Which is quite right as well. And like you say, it's the whole kind of awareness piece of the links with that. So, you know, for anybody, we've talked already about the lack of awareness around the menopause, not just for women, but with men as well. You know, it's all right having that policy in place, but unless they understand that actually it's not just women going through the change or hot flushes, then actually the wider impact on mental health, their ability to do their job, things like that, then they don't understand why it's important to have that culture and those policies in place. So the whole awareness raising of how it links back to mental health, it's not just a physical thing that they're going through, is really important, isn't it? To sort of raise that.
I think it absolutely is. And I also think, I mean, this is by no means my area of specialism, but I also think that more generally, it's also important that employers understand that, yes, you know, they will have potentially lots of women, but they will also have transgender men and non-binary colleagues, family, friends who might also experience menopause. So I think, you know, sort of, again, it's about looking at how we can help everybody, you know, sort of live and work better together.
Yeah. And in terms of employees then, so what advice would you give them if they're struggling at work to kind of start having these conversations?
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual. I think sometimes it can be easier for some than others, but generally what I would say is, if you are struggling with symptoms that you believe are connected to perimenopause, then the best thing to do is to think before you make any kind of request for a meeting, whether that's with your line manager, with HR, if you're in a position in your organization where you have occupational health, it might be with them. But whoever it is you're going to request to speak to, have a really good think about how your symptoms are impacting you in the workplace.
Yeah.
And then think about what would be the small changes that would help you the most.
Yeah.
Because I think if you're approaching, let's say you're approaching a line manager who has never had a conversation about menopause before and perhaps has not had any training either.
Yeah.
If you just approach them with the challenges, how do they then begin to try to think about what the possible solutions would be? So I think when you're thinking about the challenges, think about what the possible solutions might be. Ask for that initial meeting with that information to hand, but then also bear in mind that you might not get answers at that meeting. Your line manager or key person might have to go away and have some conversations with colleagues around what they potentially can offer. And then it's really important that that line of communication is kept open,
Yeah.
because perimenopause, from perimenopause to postmenopause, symptoms can come and go. They can alleviate completely. They can be replaced by different symptoms. They can heighten. They'll go into the background. It is a bit like this.
Yeah.
So it is important to keep that conversation going, because those reasonable adjustments might actually need to be adjusted as time goes on.
Yeah. And like you say, going to them with solutions just makes it that bit easier for them to tackle it. You're much more likely to get the support because you're going and saying, and it could be simple things like, could I have a desk fan if you're having hot flushes, or could we try and organize meetings for the afternoon? You know, you're starting to come with some practical solutions, aren't you? And like you said, they can come back with more information. It might be that once they've gone and spoken to somebody, they know a bit more about best practices, things that work for others. But it's sort of, like you say, it's a good idea to come with solutions, isn't it? Just to make it that bit easier for them to support you as well. So no, that's
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think if you can bring potential solutions as well as the challenges, I always think it makes it a more productive conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And what are the most common things that women speak to you about, whether that's in the personal side of what they're going through physically or emotionally, or with work? What are the most common things you find people struggle with?
So probably the most common symptom is anxiety. Increased levels of anxiety. Although if we were to go and ask people on the street, they would say, when you said, you know, what do you know about menopause? They would say hot flushes. Actually, the psychological symptoms are often the first ones to come along, and they are definitely the most reported. So anxiety, low mood, perhaps changes to levels of confidence, cognition, changes to memory and concentration. Now, that can be a real challenge in the workplace.
I'm already starting that. People keep saying, I told you that. Like, I don't, I don't remember
So
that.
then it's about tackling that with, you know, really practical stuff like, you know, kind of keeping notes, either physical notes or keeping notes on your phone.
Yeah.
As you say, trying to organize your day for when you feel that you can be, you know, sort of the most engaged. it's also about remembering. I think we forget that as human beings, we're not really set up to concentrate for more than about 90 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
So we should be taking a break every 90 minutes or so, because essentially your brain just gets tired. You
Yeah.
need to go and have a breather. So, if you're struggling with changes to hormones, and of course, one of the key issues around brain function is actually brain energy. It's the way that hormones actually, kind of fire up the brain with that energy. So, kind of we've seen in studies that there's absolutely kind of no change in sort of how effective men and women can be in this midlife time, but it's about the amount of brain energy that's available. So that's really key. If anybody wants to know more about that, there's a fascinating TED talk by a neuroscientist called Lisa Mosconi. Really interesting. So those symptoms, heavy bleeding in the workplace. So I think when people think about periods stopping, it's all about them getting lighter and more infrequent. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, for some people, they can become significantly heavier. And I think if you're working in an office environment, particularly with lots of other people, I've spoken to lots of women who have said, I spend a lot of my day just worrying that I'm not going to bleed through my clothes.
The anxiety that brings in itself, or if you're constantly having to go to the toilet to check, the worry of people are noticing you at the toilet all the time, so
Yes,
some of those symptoms bring on anxiety, or the worry about forgetting things in a meeting heightens that anxiety, doesn't it?
exactly that, lovely. And I think perhaps the symptoms that nobody ever talks about because they feel embarrassed are the genitourinary symptoms. So as well as the heavy bleeding, perhaps having to make frequent visits to the loo because you're experiencing urinary frequency or urgency. And, I have had a couple of clients over the past few years, not many, but I have had a couple of clients over the past few years who have actually left work because of the vulval symptoms that they were experiencing, because the vulval discomfort that they felt was really so challenging for them that they couldn't sit at a desk for X amount of hours a day. So I think it is very individual for each person. But I think we have to remember that symptoms are psychological, cognitive, physical, and there are these genitourinary symptoms that nobody ever wants to talk about, but it is vital that we talk about.
Because how do people know that that's a sign of the menopause,
Yeah,
or just feel validated in the things they're going through? A lot of
exactly
people I
that.
speak to across both fields that I work in, a lot of it is just feeling validated and knowing that it's okay that's happening and it's okay to talk about it. The only way that happens is by other people talking about it, isn't it?
And yeah, and sort of feeling that you're not alone,
Yeah.
because I think it can be hugely isolating.
Yeah.
If you feel that it is just you. So, that whole, as you said right at the beginning, me having the opportunity to talk to that doctor, but actually having that space,
Yeah.
not being rushed through. Yes, of course, her knowledge of the subject was vital for getting, but actually not being rushed along and having that time
Yeah.
made all the difference. Being validated, being understood made all the difference.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult if you're, say, in a group, or you've got a group of friends who none of them have had struggles with their menopause, have sort of sailed through it. You then almost feel
Yeah.
like you can't moan about it because they don't understand, or they just think that you're moaning for no reason and don't understand how debilitating some of these things can be. So it's finding that space, isn't it? And that's why the campaign you do is so important as well.
Yeah, so the Make Menopause Matter campaign, that sort of came a little bit later from me starting Menopause Support. So I started really just to try and share as much factual, evidence-based information and as many free resources as we could. Then the one-to-one work and the consultancy work came after that. But I was sitting at my computer one evening and I was just about to shut down, and I got yet another just heartbreaking email from somebody. And I remember I hit the desk and said out loud to myself, right, that's it. We need a national campaign.
Yeah.
And I sat there, that I've never run a campaign before. I sat there that night on change.org, wrote the campaign, and basically the aims came out of what I had been told time and time and time again in the preceding couple of years, which was, why the hell did nobody ever teach me about this? Why doesn't my doctor understand? Why wasn't I taught about it in school? And why can't I get the right help in the workplace? So essentially, the aims are to have mandatory menopause training for GPs and medical students, to have menopause guidance and awareness in every workplace, to have menopause included in the RSE curriculum in schools, and for there to be a national government-led public health menopause awareness campaign. So far, we've achieved having menopause included in the curriculum in England, and I believe it's now in Scotland too. We also know, thanks to the Women's Health Strategy report last year, that all medical students will be taught about menopause from next year, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
Things are changing organically in the workplace. I think the awareness raising has driven many organizations to recognize that this is just another step along the way to being inclusive of everybody.
And you just hope that the actions follow that as well, that it's not just a bit of a, it's hot topic, let's talk about it and say we're going to do something, but the actions follow that as well.
And I also think that a lot of that has been driven by people who work for those organizations. So women within those organizations who have been part of the campaign or part of a forum, you know, or they're on Instagram or whatever, or LinkedIn, and people are talking about it. And they then go to their employer and say, okay, so what are we doing about this? I think, you know, I talk a lot about the power of grassroots community. And I think it has very much been a grassroots movement.
Yeah, and I think it makes it more real that way. And I think it everyday people working out support that's needed for everyday people. I think it has to be that, because as much as it's amazing having these huge campaigns and having celebrities talking about it, it's not always relatable to individual people and relatable to workplaces. It has to be us normal people fighting to have the support that we need and that works for people, you know, and as you say, because each organization is different, there's large companies, smaller companies, shift workers, everybody has to have something that, you know, it has to be specific to where they work, it has to be specifically right to them. So driving from, as much as this wider awareness is great, the change is going to be happening from the bottom up, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the brilliant things, apart from, you know, kind of the formal awareness and training, etc., I think one of the brilliant things that so many organizations do now are the peer support groups within the organization. So, you know, kind of you just have people supporting others, talking about what's worked for them, how they're doing, signposting in the right direction. I think that's a really powerful thing.
It is. And I mean, I've set up lots of support groups for clinics on the fertility side and national groups for that. And the validation that people feel, it comes back to that feeling like you're not alone, the validation you get with that. And the menopause groups are the same. You find people who feel exactly the same as you, maybe have suggestions, whether that's holistic things, whether that's advice on talking to their GP. It's other people who can help and support and just validate what you're going through. So yeah, they're really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that they're your colleagues, they're always around. So it's not like, you know, sort of somebody coming in 2 or 3 times a year. You've got people there that you know and recognize every day that you can have a chat with over a coffee.
Yeah, and they'll know the things that work for you. So if you work in a specific type of organization or in a specific role where, say, shift work or teaching or something like that, where it's not just office based and you can't just do the same things that, you know, across the board, they'll have best practices that they can share. Things that work for one person will work for another. Line managers can speak to other line managers about how they've supported employees. And it just means that there's the inter-organization support an understanding, isn't there?
Yeah, it's really just about normalizing the conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And we've only got sort of just 5 to 7 minutes left. So just as a last point, what advice would you give somebody who was struggling? What would be your main bit of advice for them to do if they felt like they were struggling with their menopause? How could they go about making things better for themselves?
Yeah, so I think, sort of for me, I think that the sort of the bedrock of good health, both now and for the future, is looking at the things that you can perhaps manage yourself. So things like, I'm not going to say sleep, because if your sleep has, gone awry, it's very difficult to manage that. But your diet, so your nutrition, your exercise, your movement, and I'm going to include your stress level. Now, I understand that that's a much easier thing to say than to do. But I think it's all about making micro changes. It's all about finding the little things that you can change and do.
Yeah.
If you do those things and you're still struggling, then it's time to reach out for support. So whether that's support via an organization like ours, or whether that's to your friends and your family, or whether that's to your GP or practice nurse, or whoever it might be that you feel that can help you, in the best way. One of the things that I would do is I would make a list of symptoms. We've got one on our website, a symptom checker. If you're still having periods, make sure that you keep a track of them, because that's useful information for whoever you're going to see. Try and do a little bit of homework if you have the kind of the headspace to do it. So I would say places like Women's Health Concern have excellent factual evidence-based information. Nice Guidance is very useful for menopause.
And they will tell you on the Nice Guidance, it'll also tell you the symptoms that GPs look out for as well, don't it? So
Yes.
they're in my planner.
Yeah.
But I know speaking to a GP, there's certain things they look for. So the Nice guidelines are good for that, because then you can go and talk about how often you're having those symptoms that are key ones for them to check as well, for you to get that diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also worth knowing that if you're over 45, your GP shouldn't be offering you a blood test to diagnose perimenopause. We speak to lots of people where that happens. It's also worth knowing that antidepressants are not first-line treatment if you're experiencing psychological symptoms related to menopause. But those things are all in Nice Guidance. If you can't bear to read Nice Guidance, we've kind of précised the 10 key points that will be useful for your appointment. That's in another free resource on the website. So I think trying to do a little bit of homework if you can, so that you feel informed when you do go for an appointment, I think that can be really useful.
Yeah, and could you just let us know the website address? And I will share it when I share the video as well, so that people can find it, just so that they know where to find your resources.
Yeah, so to find the resources, if you go to menopausesupport.co.uk.
Brilliant. So they can get all of those on there. And I will share how they can reach you and everything like that when I share the video.
And sign the petition.
Yes, I will put the link to the petition on as well. So
brilliant. Thank you.
But thank you so much. It's been brilliant to speak to you. But
My pleasure.
Your sort of knowledge and the information support you share is brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing. I know it'd be really helpful for people.
My pleasure. Lovely. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Take care.